Some films enter the room quietly. Blade 2 kicks the door open, floods the walls with crimson light, and dares you to keep up. Welcome back to the Film Box, the place where we do more than revisit movies. We pull them apart, study the choices hiding under the surface, and ask why certain stories still feel alive long after the credits fade. Today we are opening a film that does not simply continue a franchise, it mutates it. Blade 2 arrives with the confidence of a sequel that knows what its audience came for, but it refuses to offer the same experience twice. The first Blade introduced a world of secret bloodlines, underground empires, and a hero trapped between two identities. This chapter takes that world, darkens every corner, widens every threat, and forces its central character into an alliance that should never work. That tension is the pulse of the film. You are not only watching a vampire hunter enter another mission, you are watching someone step into a world where every rule he understands begins to bend. Enemies become temporary partners. Familiar monsters begin to fear something worse. Survival stops being about strength alone and becomes a test of instinct, distrust, and control. That is where Blade 2 becomes more than a straightforward action sequel. On the surface, it is fast, brutal, stylish, and built around confrontation. Underneath that energy is a story about unstable alliances. It is about what happens when two sides that hate each other suddenly discover a common enemy. It is about whether cooperation can ever be real when betrayal is expected from the beginning. And it is about the uncomfortable truth that sometimes the greatest threat is created by the system trying to control it. The streets feel colder, the hideouts feel less secure, the creatures feel less familiar. Even the quiet moments carry the sense that something is waiting beyond the frame. Every character enters the story believing they understand the hierarchy around them. Then that hierarchy starts collapsing, and right in the center stands Blade. He is controlled, disciplined, and difficult to read. He moves through danger as if hesitation is a luxury he abandoned years ago. Yet his strength is not simply physical, it comes from constant restraint. He is always managing the conflict inside him, deciding what kind of person he will be, even when the world keeps trying to reduce him to what runs through his veins. Blade exists between worlds, but belongs fully to neither. He understands the human fear of vampires and the vampire obsession with power. He knows both sides can be cruel. He knows both sides can lie. Because he has spent his life surviving between identities, he recognizes danger before anyone else is willing to admit it exists. But this time, recognition may not be enough. Blade 2 is interested in escalation, but not only in the usual sequel sense. Yes, the battles are larger, the enemies are more disturbing, the stakes reach further. Yet the real escalation is psychological. The film keeps asking how far Blade can enter the darkness without allowing that darkness to define him. It places him beside characters who reflect different versions of what he could become: loyal, corrupted, desperate, controlled, or consumed. That is why this film still has such a distinct energy. It does not feel like a polished superhero adventure designed to reassure you. It feels rougher, stranger, more physical. Its world has texture. Metal doors scrape open. Underground rooms seem wet with age. Technology and ancient mythology exist beside each other without ever becoming comfortable. The entire film carries the atmosphere of a hidden war happening beneath ordinary life. But speed alone is not what makes Blade 2 memorable. Its real power comes from the personality behind the camera, the intensity of the central performance, and the choice to treat horror as more than decoration. The creatures are not simply obstacles. They change the balance of power. They create fear in characters who once believed they were the ones to be feared. That reversal matters. A predator is comfortable when it controls the rules. Remove that control, and confidence becomes panic. Blade 2 uses that shift to build suspense. It is not only asking whether Blade can stop the threat, it is asking what happens to an entire hidden society when it realizes it may no longer be at the top of the food chain. This is where the film becomes layered. The action brings you in, but the changing power structure keeps you watching. The style catches your attention, but mistrust creates the real tension. The monsters are frightening, but the motives behind them may be even more revealing. And through all of it, the Finn never forgets what makes Blade compelling. He does not need to explain himself constantly. He does not seek approval. He acts, observes, and waits for everyone else to reveal who they truly are. That silence gives the movie weight. So, as we open this film, we are going to look beyond the fights, the weapons, and the surface level cool. We are going to explore the fear, the design, the betrayal, the hidden ideas, and the choices that turned this sequel into one of the most distinctive comic book horror films of its era. Some details will make the action hit harder. Some will change the way you read certain characters. And some may reveal that the most dangerous thing in this story is not the creature hiding in the dark, but the ambition that created it. Every film is a box. We open it together. And with Blade 2, the first thing we find inside is a question: what happens when the monsters discover they are no longer the ones everyone should fear? Because Blade 2 is built around a terrifying reversal. For years, vampires have survived by remaining hidden, organized, and confident in their superiority. They see humanity as fragile. They see hunters as inconveniences. Even Blade, the figure they fear most, is still understood as a familiar kind of threat. He can be tracked. He can be studied. He can be fought. Then something appears that does not respect their rules. It does not care about status, bloodline, wealth, or tradition. It does not recognize the authority of the vampire world. It does not negotiate. It simply consumes, spreads, and leaves panic behind. And suddenly, the creatures who once owned the darkness begin searching for protection inside it. That is the hook at the center of Blade 2. The film takes a predator and forces it to experience the terror of becoming prey. More importantly, it places Blade in the middle of that fear. The very society he has spent his life fighting now needs the one person it would normally want destroyed. Picture the tension inside that arrangement. Blade is expected to stand beside trained killers who know his reputation. They have studied him as an enemy. Some of them would gladly attack him if circumstances were different. He knows their loyalty has an expiration date. They know his cooperation does not equal forgiveness. Every room becomes a test. A look can feel like a warning. A joke can hide an insult. A tactical discussion can become a quiet struggle for control. The ions may exist on paper, but emotionally, everyone remains armed, and that is before the real danger arrives. What makes the film difficult to ignore is the way it combines two different kinds of suspense. One comes from the creatures outside the group, the other comes from the people standing inside it. Blade cannot focus entirely on the enemy ahead because betrayal may be waiting behind him. He has to calculate every movement, every instruction, and every shift in behavior. The film understands that danger becomes more intense when trust is impossible. If Blade were working alone, the situation would be simpler. He would hunt, adapt, and strike. But cooperation introduces uncertainty. He must share information with people who might use it against him. He must depend on fighters who were originally trained to kill him. He must enter hostile territory while pretending that everyone involved wants the same outcome. They do not. They may share the same immediate objective, but their deeper motives remain hidden. Some fight for survival. Some fight for royalty. Some fight because they have no choice. Others may be protecting secrets larger than the mission itself. Here is what most people miss. The film's central threat is not frightening only because it is powerful. It is frightening because it exposes weakness. It reveals that the vampire world is not as controlled as it appears. Its leaders do not know everything. Its soldiers are not fearless. Its systems can fail. The confidence of an entire species begins cracking under pressure, and once that happens, every old rivalry becomes more dangerous. Blade sees those cracks immediately. He has never trusted the appearance of order. He understands that powerful institutions often survive by hiding what they cannot control. When they ask for help, he does not mistake desperation for honesty. He knows that fear can make enemies cooperative, but it can also make them reckless. That awareness gives every encounter an extra edge. The film does not ask you to believe that Blade suddenly accepts the vampire world. It asks you to watch him enter it with his eyes open. He is not there because he has forgotten what these creatures are capable of doing. He is there because the new threat may be worse, and because refusing to act would allow innocent lives to be caught in the consequences. That distinction matters. Blade is not guided by affection for his temporary allies. He is guided by responsibility. He understands that sometimes the right decision does not feel pure. Sometimes survivor demands standing beside someone you despise, not because they deserve your trust, but because the alternative is more dangerous. This gives Blade 2 attention that reaches beyond its action scenes. The film becomes a story about compromised choices. Nobody enters the alliance cleanly. Nobody fully controls what follows. Every character carries a separate idea of what victory should look like, and the closer they move toward their enemy, the harder it becomes to believe they will all walk away together. You can feel that instability before the first major confrontation begins. The team looks powerful, but power does not equal unity. Their weapons are advanced, their training is precise, their confidence is visible. Yet, one wrong decision could turn the entire group against itself. Then the film introduces a question that hangs over everything. What happens when the enemy understands you faster than you understand it? Blade usually wins because he prepares. He studies behavior, recognizes patterns, and attacks weaknesses. But this threat is still evolving. Its rules are unclear, its limits are unknown. Every encounter becomes an experiment, and each mistake costs more than the last. That uncertainty transforms the familiar Blade formula. You still get the confidence, the weapons, the physical precision, and the sharp visual style. But underneath the cool surface is genuine anxiety. The hero is entering a conflict where experience may not be enough. His enemies are changing, his allies are unreliable, and the truth behind the mission is buried beneath layers of secrecy. So, the real reason Blade 2 pulls you in is not simply that it offers a stronger monster. It creates a world where nobody is standing on solid ground. The vampires are afraid. Blade is surrounded. The alliance is unstable. The threat is spreading. And somewhere beneath the official explanation is the possibility that the entire crisis began with a decision someone is still trying to hide. Before we enter that story, though, we need to look at the filmmaker who shaped its darkness, the casting choices that gave its characters weight, and the production decisions that made the sequel feel so different from the first. The first key decision was choosing Guillermo del Toro to direct the sequel because Blade 2 needed someone who could respect the confidence of the original while making its horror feel newly dangerous. Del Toro was not brought in to erase what Stephen Norrington had established. According to the film's production notes, he studied the first movie closely, going through its footage to understand the visual language that made Blade feel so controlled and distinctive. At the same time, the filmmakers wanted the sequel to be considerably scarier, which made Del Toro's fascination with creatures and dark fantasy an ideal match. That intention changes the entire temperature of Blade 2. The original film often made vampires look powerful because they were wealthy, organized, and hidden inside human society. Del Toro keeps that hierarchy, then introduces something capable of tearing through it. The Reapers are not seductive aristocrats. They are diseased, hungry, and almost insect-like in the way they move and spread. Once you understand the director's desire to push the franchise deeper into horror, the sequel's darker corridors, distorted bodies, and sudden bursts of panic stop feeling like simple escalation. They become a statement of purpose. This film is taking the glamour of the vampire world and infecting it with fear. The second revealing fact is that Del Toro did not approach the sequel as a disconnected reinvention. He reportedly wanted the movie to feel like a collision between a comic book and Japanese animation while preserving the identity Wesley Snipes and the original team had already created. He studied Stephen Norrington's directing style rather than rejecting it. He wanted to understand why the first film moved the way it did before adding his own visual personality to the continuation. That combination explains the film's unusual rhythm. Characters hold poses like graphic silhouettes. Weapons are introduced with almost ceremonial attention. Bodies move to the frame with sudden, exaggerated speed. Certain confrontations are less interested in ordinary realism than in creating one powerful image after another. Look closer at the action and you can feel those influences pulling in different directions. The comic book side gives Blade his iconic stillness. He can stand in the center of chaos and appear completely composed. The animation influence allows the movement around him to become faster, stranger, and more elastic. The result is a film that does not always obey realistic physical movement but often succeeds at something more important. It turns Blade into a figure who appears to have been carved directly out of the darkness. That heightened style is one reason the movie still feels separate from the cleaner and more standardized comic book films that followed. The third major production choice involved the environment. Filming took place largely in the Czech Republic, with Prague Studios and Barrandov Studios playing important roles in the production. The filmmakers also completed work in London during a shoot that ran through the spring and early summer of 2001. Prague was not merely a location placed behind the actors. Its architecture, industrial spaces, underground passages, and eating surfaces gave the film a world that felt both ancient and technologically corrupted. That matters because Blade 2 is built on the collision between old blood and new machinery. The vampire society appears rooted in centuries of tradition, yet it surrounds itself with laboratories, surveillance equipment, specialized weapons, and controlled experiments. Prague's stone, metal tunnels, and decaying grandeur make that contradiction visible. The film rarely feels as though it is taking place in an ordinary modern city. It feels like it is moving through the hidden organs of an older civilization. This detail changes the way you see the headquarters, sewers, clubs, and containment areas. They are not neutral backgrounds. They reinforce the idea that these characters are trapped inside systems built long before they arrive. Even the advanced technology seems temporary when it is surrounded by walls that appear to have witnessed generations of secrecy. Del Toro uses the environment to tell you that the conflict is ancient, even when the mutation at its center is new. The fourth production fact involves how the Reapers were physically created. The production combined prosthetic makeup and animatronic effects from Steve Johnson's XFX group with digital creature and stunt work from Tippett Studio. Additional visual effects companies supported the more complex transformations and movements. That mixture was essential because the creatures needed to feel physically present beside the actors while performing actions that practical effects alone could not easily achieve. The most memorable design decision is the Reaper mouth. Instead of giving the creature a conventional set of exaggerated fangs, the face splits apart, turning something recognizably human into a feeding mechanism. It is disturbing because the transformation destroys the identity of the face. The mouth is normally where a character speaks, expresses emotion, and communicates intention. Here, it opens into pure appetite. The practical elements give the design weight. The skin, folds, and prosthetic surfaces catch the same lighting as the actors and occupy real space inside the frame. The digital effects then push the movement beyond normal anatomy. At its best, this combination creates the feeling that the body itself has become unstable. The Reaper is not simply wearing a monster face, its biology has betrayed the human shape. The technical approach supports the film's central idea. These creatures are not supernatural in a distant or magical way. They are presented like an uncontrolled mutation moving through a living system. The horror comes from infection, adaptation, and physical change. By combining tangible makeup with digital transformation, the film keeps them close enough to touch while making their true limits impossible to predict. The fifth production fact sits inside the casting and action design. Donnie Yen appears as Snowman, one of the Bloodpack members, but his contribution was not limited to performing in front of the camera. Del Toro also brought him in to contribute martial arts choreography alongside the film's established stunt and fight teams. Del Toro reportedly wanted the combat to remain predominantly free from excessive wire work. He also wanted Yan's naturally acrobatic instincts adjusted to match Blade's harder, more direct fighting style. That influence becomes important whenever the Bloodpack is presented as an elite unit. The film needs you to believe these characters were specifically trained to hunt Blade himself. Costumes and weapons can suggest danger, but movement has to complete illusion. The fighters carry themselves with individual attitudes. Some depend on aggression, some use their size, others rely on control technique. Even when the story does not give every Bloodpack member extensive development, their physical identities help them register quickly. Snowman is especially memorable because he communicates through posture, timing, and economy. He does not require a long explanation. His stillness tells you that he is watching. His weapon handling tells you that he is prepared. This is a strong example of choreography becoming characterization. The way someone fights can reveal confidence, fear, discipline, or arrogance before the screenplay tells you anything about them. And then there is Wesley Snipes himself. Blade 2 was not a case of an actor simply returning, putting on the costume, and following instructions. Snipes also served as a producer and remained deeply involved in the film, including its development and fight choreography. People involved with the production repeatedly emphasized how strongly he understood Blade. Del Toro reportedly believed Snipes possessed an instinctive understanding of what the character would and would not do. You can see that ownership in the performance. Blade rarely wastes motion. He does not reach for emotional approval. His humor arrives dry and controlled. Even when surrounded by characters attempting to provoke him, he reveals only what he chooses. That discipline is part acting, part movement, and part a clear understanding of the image Blade must maintain. The useful tension is that Del Toro brought a highly personal monster sensibility while Snipes protected the internal logic of the hero. One pushed the world toward mutation, texture, and horror. The other kept Blade grounded in control. The film works because neither energy completely overwhelms the other. Even David S. Goya's basic story design reflects that balance. Blade is placed beside dangerous specialists who must cooperate, despite having every reason to distrust one another. The Bloodpack is not created to become a comfortable family. It is a weapon assembled from incompatible parts. Once you understand these production choices, Blade 2 begins to look less like a sequel designed only to be bigger. It becomes a carefully engineered collision. Del Toro's creature horror collides with Snipes' controlled heroism. European locations collide with comic book movement. Practical makeup collides with digital transformation. Martial arts precision collides with chaotic survival. And all of it prepares us to open the box itself, what Blade 2 is, where it sits inside the franchise, and why this strange mixture of superhero action, vampire mythology, and biological horror still deserves attention. Blade 2 was released in 2002, directed by Guillermo del Toro, and led once again by Wesley Snipes as the half human, half vampire warrior at the center of this hidden world. Around him is a cast designed to create friction rather than comfort. Kristofferson returns as Whistler, the damaged mentor whose bond with Blade gives the franchise much of its emotional grounding. Ron Perlman brings aggressive confidence to Reinhardt. Leonor Varela plays Nyssa with a mixture of discipline, loyalty, and restrained curiosity. Norman Reedus enters the story as Scud, a younger weapons specialist, whose casual energy contrasts sharply with Blade's controlled presence. Luke Goss gives the central threat a physical sadness that becomes increasingly important as the film unfolds. At first glance, Blades 2 is an action horror sequel built from vampires, martial arts, advanced weapons, and comic book mythology. But that description does not completely open the box. At its heart, this is a survival film about enemies who are forced to cooperate when a new form of danger threatens them both. It is also a story about evolution, control, and the arrogance of believing that life can be redesigned without consequences. The movie comes from the Marvel Comics character created by writer Marv Wolfman and artist Gene Colan. But this version of Blade had already developed its own cinematic identity by the time the sequel arrived. The first film established him not as a brightly colored traditional superhero, but as a figure who belonged equally to underground horror, urban action, and martial arts cinema. Blade exists because that first movie proved the character could carry a world of his own. Instead of repeating the same conflict, the sequel expands the mythology. It asks what lies above the vampires we already know, what might exist beneath them, and what could make an entire species question its position in the natural order. That is a smart direction for a second chapter. A weaker sequel might simply have introduced a more powerful vampire and given Blade a larger weapon. This film changes the structure of the conflict itself. Blade is no longer only attacking an established enemy. He is being invited into the enemy's private world, where tradition, science, family, and power are connected by secrets. The situation immediately becomes more complicated. Blade may be the strongest person in the room, but strength does not give him complete control. He has to interpret motives, survive manipulation, and decide when cooperation becomes a trap. That makes the story feel closer to a tense military operation than a conventional hero versus villain adventure. The film's genre mixture is one of its greatest strengths. The action gives it momentum, horror gives it uncertainty, science fiction adds the fear of mutation, the comic book foundation allows the world to become heightened and stylized. Martial arts give Blade's character a physical language that words could never communicate as effectively. These elements do not always blend perfectly, but they create a personality that is difficult to confuse with anything else. Blade 2 is for you when you enjoy genre films that are willing to look strange, move aggressively, and enter darker territory without apologizing for it. It is especially effective if you appreciate practical creature design, industrial environments, physical combat, and heroes who reveal themselves through action rather than long emotional speeches. It also works for anyone fascinated by temporary alliances. The film understands that watching enemies stand together can be more tense than watching them attack each other. Every cooperative moment contains the possibility of betrayal. Every act of respect could be genuine, strategic, or temporary. That uncertainty gives even simple conversations an edge. However, the movie may be less satisfying if you need every supporting character to receive a deep personal arc. Several members of the group are introduced through appearance, attitude, and combat style more than detailed development. Their personalities are clear, but their inner lives are not always explored. The storytelling also embraces comic book logic. Technology appears exactly when the mission requires it. Characters survive punishment that would stop an ordinary person. The action occasionally prioritizes striking imagery over believable physical movement. For this particular world, that exaggeration is part of the experience. The film wants Blade to feel almost mythic. He is not presented as an ordinary man who happens to be skilled. He is presented as the product of two worlds, carrying the advantages and burdens of both. That identity is what makes the Central Alliance so interesting. Blade is close enough to the vampires to understand their instincts, but distant enough to recognize their corruption. He can move inside their society without accepting its values. He can feel the hunger they feel without surrendering to it. The conflict is therefore not simply external. Every monster Blade faces is also a reminder of what uncontrolled appetite can become. Every vampire leader who speaks about order reflects a system Blade has rejected. Every attempt to use him as a tool tests whether he can remain independent inside a mission designed by people he does not trust. My spoiler free verdict is that Blade 2 is one of those sequels that succeeds by becoming more specific rather than more respectable. It is messier than a perfectly polished blockbuster. Some effects have aged more gracefully than others. Certain characters deserve more room. The story moves so quickly that emotional moments occasionally have to fight for space. But the film has vision. It knows what kind of darkness it wants. It understands the power of Wesley Snipes' presence. It gives Guillermo del Toro enough space to make the creatures, environments, and mythology feel personal, and it delivers action with a physical confidence that many later comic book films struggle to match. Most importantly, it does not treat horror as a temporary visual coating. Horror changes the story. It changes who holds power. It changes how the vampires see themselves. It changes what Blade must become to survive the mission. Blade 2 is not simply a larger continuation of the first film, it is an infected sequel. It takes everything the original built, introduces a new organism into the system, and watches the entire world react. And the feeling of entering that world for the first time is where the experience becomes impossible to separate from its atmosphere. The first time Blade 2 pulls you into its world, it does not feel like a superhero movie waiting to introduce a heroic pose. It feels like a rescue mission taking place inside a nightmare. The opening minutes immediately establish that this story has moved into colder territory. The surroundings feel abandoned, industrial, and unhealthy. Light does not brighten the world. It reveals dirt, metal, damaged walls, and the evidence of something hidden beneath ordinary life. There is no comforting return to familiarity. The film begins by showing that the past has not remained safely behind Blade. A figure connected to him is still alive, still suffering, and trapped inside the very world Blade has spent years trying to destroy. That discovery gives the opening a personal urgency before the larger threat is even introduced. The mission is not abstract. Blade is not fighting because someone handed him a responsibility. He is entering danger because something unresolved has been waiting for him in the dark. That emotional connection makes the first sequence more effective than a simple action introduction. Blade still moves with complete control, but beneath that control is anger. You can feel that this is not routine work. Every door he forces open takes him closer to an answer he may not want. The film also understands how to reintroduce its hero. Blade does not need a long speech explaining who he is. His posture, preparation, weapons, and refusal to hesitate tell you everything. He enters hostile spaces as though he has already imagined every possible attack. Then the action begins. The editing accelerates, the soundtrack gains force. The camera follows Blade through narrow interiors where every corner could hide another attacker. His movements are efficient, but the filmmaking makes them feel theatrical. A weapon appears with just enough emphasis to turn it into an icon. A pause lasts long enough to build anticipation. Then violence arrives in a sudden burst. I walked in expecting a stylish continuation of the first Blade, but the film gave me something more creature driven, claustrophobic, and strangely emotional. That difference becomes clear very quickly. The original film had a strong urban identity. It presented vampires as a secret ruling class operating behind clubs, businesses, and institutions. Blade 2 Ditto keeps the underground world but makes it feel older and more diseased. The locations seem less like places people live and more like places that have absorbed years of fear. The atmosphere is thick with the sense that something is wrong before the characters understand exactly what it is. Even secure rooms do not feel safe. The vampire headquarters may be protected by armed guards and advanced technology, but the design suggests vulnerability rather than comfort. Everything looks temporary. Metal gates can be broken. Laboratories can fail. Surveillance can miss something. Powerful leaders can lose control. That mode hooked me within the first 10 minutes because the film creates the feeling that Blade is moving toward a situation larger than the mission he thinks he is completing. His early goal seems clear. Then the world shifts around him. The reappearance of Whistler adds emotional weight, but it also introduces uncertainty. Blade is not someone who openly discusses grief, loyalty, or affection. His connection to Whistler has always been expressed through action. He searches, he rescues, he protects. That makes their reunion feel more powerful than a sentimental speech would have. Blade's restraint does not mean he feels nothing. It means he has learned to bury emotion beneath discipline because emotion can become a weakness in the world he inhabits. Whistler's condition complicates that reunion. He has survived, but survival has changed him. The film allows suspicion to enter the relationship immediately. Blade wants to believe in the person he recovered, yet he also understands what captivity inside the vampire world could have done. That tension gives the opening a human center. Before the Reapers, before the Bloodpack, and before the larger mission, the film asks whether trust can survive contamination. The introduction of Scud changes the energy again. He brings noise, technology, and a looser personality into Blade's control environment. Where Whistler feels weathered and traditional, Scud feels improvised. He treats danger with casual humor and approaches weapons as inventions waiting to be improved. Blade stands between them. One represents the history that shaped him. The other represents the system he built while that history was missing. This creates tension without requiring the film to stop moving. You can immediately feel that the three men do not fit together naturally. Whistler is suspicious. Scud is defensive beneath his confidence. Blade refuses to explain himself to either of them. The hideout becomes emotionally crowded even before the Bloodpack arrives. Then the vampires enter Blade's territory, and the film's central tension finally reveals itself. The moment works because Blade is not summoned into their world like an obedient soldier. Their representatives have to step into his. They enter the space of the person they fear and ask for cooperation while trying to preserve their dignity. Blade recognizes their imbalance. He knows they would never approach him unless they had run out of safer options. That realization makes their offer more frightening than flattering. When the vampires admit they are facing a new danger, the film communicates how serious the situation has become without showing everything immediately. Here is where it gets layered. These creatures consider Blade one of their greatest enemies, yet they are now willing to expose their leadership, their soldiers, and part of their internal crisis to him. That means whatever is spreading through their population has already broken through their confidence. The introduction of the Bloodpack delivers the final piece of the first watch experience. They arrive with specialized equipment, individual styles, and the aggressive confidence of fighters who believe they already understand Blade. The revelation that they were trained specifically to hunt him turns the meeting into a quiet confrontation. This is not a normal team formation. Nobody exchanges friendly introductions. Nobody pretends that mutual respect already exists. Every member of the group appears to be measuring Blade, waiting to see whether the stories about him are true. Blade responds in the only language the room completely understands: control. He does not need to threaten everyone directly. He simply refuses to be intimidated. His calm becomes a challenge. His silence forces the others to fill the space with their own insecurity. The confrontation that follows is more than a display of strength. It establishes the emotional rules of the alliance. Blade will cooperate, but he will not submit. The Bloodpack may know how to hunt vampires, but Blade understands how they think. He knows their pride, their anger, and their tendency to confuse aggression with power. By the time the mission truly begins, the film has already created several separate dangers. There is the unknown species waiting outside. There is the vampire leadership controlling the operation. There is the Bloodpack's hostility toward Blade. There is the unstable relationship between Whistler and Scud. And there is Blade's own inability to trust anyone completely. That is what made it hard to look away. The movie does not rely on a single mystery, it builds a network of suspicion. Every answer creates another question. Every alliance contains an argument waiting to happen. You begin watching for the action, but the atmosphere keeps you inside the film. The world feels wet, metallic, and infected. The characters feel armed even when their weapons are lowered. The music and sound design keep reminding you that danger may arrive through a wall, from above, or from the person standing beside you. Blade 2's first act makes a clear promise. The hero is prepared. The team is powerful. The enemy is still worse than anyone expects. And the filmmaking techniques used to create that feeling are where the film's personality becomes even more visible. Blade here looks as though it was built from steel, smoke, wet stone, and blood colored light. That visual texture is not decoration, it tells you what kind of world these characters inhabit before the story explains anything. The surfaces feel worn down. The rooms are crowded with pipes, wires, medical equipment, weapons, and shadows. Even the most advanced spaces look contaminated by something ancient. Guillermo del Toro uses that contrast constantly. The vampire society presents itself as sophisticated, organized, and technologically advanced, yet the environment surrounding it feels closer to tombs than laboratories. Modern machines sit inside spaces that appear centuries old. Bright monitors glow against stained walls. Scientific control is placed inside Gothic decay. The message is clear. This is civilization trying to modernize without escaping the corruption at its foundation. The lighting is one of the film's strongest tools. Blade is often framed inside heavy darkness, but he is rarely swallowed by it. A thin strip of light catches his glasses, the edge of his coat, or the shape of a weapon. He becomes readable through silhouette before detail. That matters because Blade is presented almost like a symbol. You do not always need to see his full expression. His outline already communicates confidence, danger, and control. The filmmakers understand that Wesley Snipes' stillness is visually powerful, so the camera often allows him to occupy the center of the frame while movement and panic happen around him. The vampires are treated differently. Their spaces frequently use colder blue, green, and silver tones. Those colors create an artificial sense of cleanliness, especially in the laboratory scenes. But the coldness never feels reassuring. It makes the world appear clinical, detached, and emotionally dead. When warmer colors enter the film, they usually signal danger. Red light spills across walls, emergency systems activate, and the image begins to feel physically hotter as control breaks down. The palette moves from cold authority toward heated panic. This is the moment the film changes everything visually. The farther the mission moves away from official control, the more unstable the lighting becomes. Flashing sources, fire, ultraviolet weapons, and deep shadows begin competing inside the same frame. The image stops feeling orderly because the characters have lost their certainty. The camera movement also shifts depending on who controls the scene. When Blade enters a location prepared and focused, the shots often feel deliberate. The camera tracks his movements smoothly, allowing him to appear as though he understands the space before anyone else. His entrances are designed to establish dominance. When the Reapers attack, that control disappears. The camera comes closer, faster, and less predictable. The creatures emerge from directions that are difficult to monitor. The editing creates the sense that the threat is not standing in front of the characters but surrounding them. That difference is important. Blade's action style is built on precision. The Reapers are filmed as disruption. One represents discipline, the other represents appetite without boundaries. The choreography reinforces the same contrast. Blade's combat is direct and economical. He uses short combinations, quick counters, and weapons with clear purpose. Even when the movement becomes stylized, the character appears to be making decisions rather than reacting blindly. The Bloodpack members move with more visible individuality. Their fighting styles communicate personality. Reinhardt attacks with aggression and pride. Snowman appears lighter and more technical. Others rely on weapons, force, speed, or teamwork. This gives the action a strong visual hierarchy. You can understand who someone is by watching how they enter a fight. The Reapers destroy that hierarchy because they do not behave like trained opponents. They climb, twist, leap, and continue moving after receiving damage that would stop a normal enemy. Their physical behavior forces the choreography to become less elegant. The fighters begin with technique, they end with survival. Editing plays a major role in creating that shift. The action sequences use rapid cuts, but the film usually gives you a clear image before accelerating. A weapon is introduced, a threat is located, a character chooses a direction. Then the sequence breaks into faster fragments. That preparation prevents the action from becoming completely unreadable. The film wants impact, but it also wants iconic moments. Blade standing alone, a group entering a dark club, a weapon activating, a creature revealed in a sudden flash. These images are allowed to land before the next moment begins. At times, the film uses digital doubles and exaggerated motion to push the action beyond physical realism. Some of those effects are more noticeable now, especially when bodies move with impossible speed or weight, but the intention remains effective. The action is not trying to look like documentary footage. It is trying to feel like a comic book panel suddenly gaining motion. The movement stretches reality to preserve Blade's mythic presence. Framing is equally important during quieter scenes. Blade is often separated from groups even when he stands inside the same room. Other characters gather while he occupies the edge or center alone. The composition reminds you that cooperation has not made him part of their world. Nyssa is framed differently as the story progresses. Early on, she is positioned close to her father's authority and the Bloodpack's formation. She appears contained by structure. As she begins questioning what she has been told, the framing gives her more isolated moments. The visual space reflects her changing loyalty before she fully expresses it. Whistler and Scud are frequently placed on opposite sides of Blade, creating a triangle of competing trust. Their differences are not only written into their dialogue. The blocking turns Blade into the point where past and present meet. Production design supports every one of these relationships. Blade's base is functional and personal. It contains weapons, tools, and signs of continuous preparation. The vampire headquarters is more ceremonial. Its design communicates hierarchy. The sewers and underground passages remove those identities entirely. Below the surface, everyone becomes vulnerable. That is why the club sequence is so effective. It begins in a space built around excess, secrecy, and confidence. Music dominates the room. Bodies move together. The vampires believe they are protected by numbers. Then the reapers enter. The editing rhythm changes. The lighting becomes more violent. The crowd stops feeling powerful and starts feeling trapped. A location designed for predators becomes a feeding ground for something worse. Sound completes the transformation. Blade 2 uses industrial music, electronic pulses, heavy percussion, mechanical impacts, and sudden drops in volume to control tension. The soundtrack does not simply accompany the action, it gives Blade a rhythm. His entrances often fill time to the music because the character himself moves with musical precision. The creature scenes use sound differently. Breathing, scraping, clicking, and wet, biological noises make the reapers feel physically close even when they are hidden. Silence is often followed by one sharp sound, forcing you to search the frame. This creates fear through anticipation rather than constant noise. The film also gives weapons distinctive sonic identities. Blades, sword, firearms, explosives, and ultraviolet devices do not sound interchangeable. Each one carries a different weight. That makes the technology feel like part of the world rather than a collection of convenient props. Look closer at the film's visual strategy, and one pattern becomes clear. Control is always represented by clean movement, strong silhouettes, balanced framing, and deliberate rhythm. Fear is represented by broken light, crowded compositions, unstable movement, and bodies that no longer behave as expected. Blade begins the film believing discipline can solve almost any problem. The filmmaking gradually places that discipline inside spaces designed to destroy it. That is why the technical choices matter. They do not only make the movie look stylish, they turn the entire production into a conflict between order and mutation, preparing us to walk through the story itself and watch that conflict spread from one character to the next. Blade's next mission begins long before the vampire nation asks for his help. For 2 years, he has been searching across Eastern Europe for Whistler, the mentor who appeared to die during the first film. Blade eventually discovers that Whistler was kept alive by vampires, repeatedly used and tormented rather than granted a clean death. He storms their base, cuts through the guards, and brings the older man back to safety. The rescue shows us something Blade almost never says aloud. Beneath the armor, Whistler is family. Blade can act detached from the world, but he has never stopped looking for the person who helped him survive it. Whistler has been infected, so Blade gives him a choice disguised as an ultimatum. He provides the serum that may reverse the transformation and gives him a limited amount of time to prove he is still himself. It is harsh, but Blade's harshness comes from experience. In his word, sympathy without caution can get innocent people killed. When Whistler survives the treatment, he returns to a life that continued without him and meets Scud, the young technician who has been helping Blade develop new weapons. The tension between them appears immediately. Whistler sees carelessness. Scud sees an old man trying to reclaim his place. Blade stands between them and refuses to manage their feelings. Then two vampires infiltrate Blade's base. They are Nyssa and Asa, and representatives of a ruling vampire council. Blade initially treats their arrival as an attack, and a fast confrontation proves that they are skilled enough to enter his world, but not strong enough to control it. Once the misunderstanding ends, they deliver an offer from Nyssa's father, the powerful overlord Damaskinos. A new mutation has appeared within the vampire population. These creatures, called reapers, feed on humans and vampires alike. Their bite spreads the condition and their numbers are growing too quickly to contain. Blade is taken into the heart of the vampire establishment, where Damaskinos explains that the reapers could eventually destroy both species. Blade understands the contradiction at once. The vampire is asking their greatest enemy to preserve the system he has spent his life fighting. He does not suddenly care about their survival, but he knows an expanding reaper population would turn humanity into an enormous feeding supply. Stopping the outbreak is therefore not an act of friendship, it is damage control. To guide him, the vampires assign the Bloodpack, an elite combat unit originally trained for one purpose, hunting Blade. The group includes Nyssa, Assad, Reinhardt, Snowman, Chupa, Lighthammer, Verlaine, and Priest. Their introduction feels like a room full of weapons pretending to be a team. Reinhardt challenges Blade almost immediately, expecting Pride to make the Daywalker reckless. Blade responds with speed, pins him down, and leaves an explosive device attached to the back of his head as a warning. He is willing to lead them, but he will not waste time negotiating authority. The team studies what little is known about the Reapers. They learn that the creatures have a hardened skeletal structure around the heart, making the traditional stake nearly useless. Silver causes limited damage. Other familiar vampire weaknesses appear ineffective. Sunlight remains fatal, which leads Scud and Whistler to modify ultraviolet weapons for the mission. The preparation is exciting because it turns monster hunting into adaptation. Every familiar role is being tested, and Blade's usual advantages have to be rebuilt around an enemy that evolved specifically to survive. Their first major operation takes them to the House of Pain, a crowded vampire nightclub. At first, the location resembles the kind of secret world Blade has attacked many times before. Music shakes the room. Vampires feed, celebrate, and assume that their numbers make them secure. But Blade is not there to punish them. He is searching for the thing hunting them. Then the Reapers arrive. The club changes from a fortress into a trap. The creatures move through the crowd with terrifying speed, attacking vampires and spreading panic before the Bloodpack can establish control. Blade fights one directly and discovers how difficult it is to stop. Its body absorbs damage. Its jaw opens into a divided feeding organ. Its hunger seems to erase any instinct for self-preservation. The Bloodbath's confidence begins collapsing because this is not the opponent they trained to face. Several members are separated in the chaos. Priest is bitten and begins changing, forcing the others to confront the speed of the infection. Blade uses ultraviolet light to destroy the transformed threat, but there is no sense of victory. The team enter the club expecting a controlled hunt. They leave understanding that every wounded ally could become another enemy. Blade also captures one of the Reapers and brings it back for examination. Nyssa studies the creature while Blade watches her reactions. She is loyal to her father and her species, yet she is not indifferent to suffering. Her scientific curiosity gradually becomes moral discomfort. The closer she looks at the mutation, the less it resembles a natural accident. The examination reveals another important detail. Reapers have an accelerated metabolism and must feed constantly. Their hunger makes them powerful, but it also makes their existence unstable. Blade recognizes the weakness hidden inside the strength. A creature ruled by appetite can be guided, distracted, or starved. The problem is that the outbreak is spreading faster than those limits can contain it. The team traces the Reapers to a network of sewers and underground tunnels. Before entering, Blade divides the force and warns everyone to remain disciplined. By now, distrust has become almost as dangerous as the mission. Reinhardt still resents Blade's authority. Tubar directs his hostility toward Whistler. Scud behaves as though the operation is another technical problem to solve. Nyssa tries to maintain loyalty to her father while evidence continues to challenge what she believes. Underground, the group loses the advantages it had above. Communication becomes unreliable. The passages are narrow, dark, and difficult to defend. The Reapers know the environment better and begin separating the hunters from one another. Lighthammer, who secretly concealed a bite from the club attack, starts turning while he is alone with Verlaine. Their relationship gives the transformation an emotional cost. She does not face an anonymous monster. She faces someone she trusted, someone whose identity is disappearing in front of her. Their final struggle ends in ultraviolet light, turning intimacy into sacrifice. Snowman fights with precision but is eventually overwhelmed. Assad falls during the operation. The Bloodpack, introduced as a perfectly designed unit, is dismantled piece by piece because it was trained for the wrong war. Its members prepare to defeat Blade, a strategic opponent with recognizable methods. The Reapers attack like an infection. They do not care about reputation, intimidation, or personal rivalry. Elsewhere, Chupa attacks Whistler, using the confusion of the mission to settle his anger. Whistler appears physically vulnerable, but he survives by thinking faster than the man trying to kill him. It releases a substance that draws the Reapers toward Chupa and allows the creatures to deliver the consequence. It is not a heroic duel. It is a reminder that Whistler has lived this long because he understands monsters, including the human-shaped ones. Blade eventually detonates the ultraviolet bomb designed to destroy the nest. The explosion eliminates most of the Reapers, but Nomak survives. Nomak is different from the others. He is not simply hungry, he is intelligent, purposeful, and angry. He recognizes Blade as another hybrid standing between species, but where Blade has built discipline around his divided nature, Nomak has allowed pain to become a mission. His behavior reveals that the Reapers are being drawn toward the vampire leadership for a reason. Nomak is not leading a random uprising. He is moving back toward the person responsible for his existence. Before Blade can uncover the entire truth, Damaskinos' forces seize control of the operation. The mission was never based on honest cooperation. The vampire ruler wanted Blade to remove the Reaper threat, gather evidence, and deliver useful biological information. Once Blade has served that purpose, Damaskinos no longer needs the alliance. Blade, Whistler, and Scud are captured. Nyssa returns to her father and learns the truth he tried to hide. Nomak is not merely a mutation that appeared naturally within the population. He is Damaskinos' son and the result of an attempt to engineer a new form of vampire, one free from traditional weaknesses. Instead of creating a perfect successor, the experiment produced a predator consumed by hunger and resentment. The entire crisis began as an effort to control evolution. That revelation changes Nissa's loyalty. She believed she was defending her people from an external disease. Now she understands that her father created the disease, concealed his responsibility, and sacrificed others to preserve his authority. Damaskinos does not view Nomak as a son or Nyssa as a daughter in the ordinary emotional sense. He views both of them as parts of a bloodline he has the right to design. Blade is taken into a chamber where his blood is harvested so the vampires can study the Daywalker's resistance to sunlight. The image brings the film's themes together. Damaskinos has spent entire story trying to transform living beings into solutions. Blade's body, Nomak's mutation, Nissa's loyalty, and the Bloodpack's training are all resources to him. Then Scud reveals that he has been working for the vampires. He claims that his partnership with Blade was part of Damaskinos' plan and that the explosive attached to Reinhardt was never active. Blade remains calm because he had already recognized the betrayal. He activates the device, proving that he never trusted Scud enough to give him control over the weapons. The moment is cold but consistent. Blade survives because he watches what people do rather than believing what they say. Whistler escapes, rescues Blade from the blood chamber, and helps him reach a pool of blood. Immersion in it restores Blade's strength. What follows is not merely a comeback. It is the release of all the control he maintained while being manipulated. He moves through Damaskinos' guards with brutal efficiency, defeats Reinhardt, and turns the vampire fortress against itself. Nomak reaches the compound with a separate goal. He is not coming to conquer vampire society, he is coming to confront his creator. Damaskinos tries to escape responsibility, but the system he built finally closes around him. Nyssa sees her father clearly at last and refuses to protect the illusion of his greatness. Nomak kills Damaskinos, but his anger does not end there. He infects Nyssa, transforming her into the final wound he can leave behind. Blade pursues him, and the two hybrids collide in a fight that feels more personal than their earlier encounter. They are physical opposites connected by the same question. What do you become when both sides of your identity reject you? Blade discovers the opening in Nomad's protective structure and strikes the exposed heart. Nomad accepts the fatal wound almost as a release. His revenge is complete, but it has not healed him. Hatred gave him direction, it never gave him peace. Blade then carries Nyssa outside. As sunrise approaches, she does not want to continue as another Reaper or remain trapped inside her father's corrupted legacy. Blade stays with her when daylight reaches them. It is a quiet ending after so much motion, and Blade allows himself a brief moment of tenderness toward someone who began as an enemy but chose truth over obedience. Later, Blade tracks down Rush, the vampire he deliberately left alive during the opening rescue. Rush believes he escaped the consequences of that night, only to discover that Blade never abandoned the hunt. The final encounter closes the circle with dark humor. Even after surviving a mutation, a conspiracy, and an army of enemies, Blade still remembers unfinished business. With the Reapers destroyed and the Alliance exposed as a lie, Blade returns to the unfinished business of his own war. The mission has not created peace between humans and vampires. It has simply revealed how much danger can be created by those who believe power gives them ownership over life. Blade entered the story to stop a mutation. He leaves after destroying the system that produced it. And this is the moment the box opens completely. What Blade 2 does brilliantly is understand that style only matters when it strengthens character. Wesley Snipes commands the film because he never performs Blade as someone trying to appear dangerous. Blade already knows what he is capable of doing. That confidence allows Snipes to remain controlled while everyone around him becomes louder, angrier, or more desperate. One of the best examples comes during the first meeting with the Bloodpack. The group surrounds Blade with the confidence of specialists who have spent years preparing to kill him. Reinhardt tries to establish dominance through aggression, expecting Blade to respond emotionally. Instead, Blade ends the confrontation almost immediately and leaves the explosive device attached to Reinhardt's head. The scene works because Snipes does not celebrate the victory. Blade treats it as a correction. His expression barely changes. His body remains relaxed. That restraint tells you more about the character than a long speech could. Blade is not interested in winning an argument. He is establishing the conditions under which he will work. Snipes also gives Blade small flashes of humanity without weakening his intimidating presence. His relationship with Whistler is the clearest example. Blade never explains how deeply he cares about the older man, but his actions make it obvious. He searches for him for years, risks entering hostile territory, brings him home, and gives him the opportunity to recover. Blade's affection is expressed through responsibility. That makes their relationship feel authentic to the character. A more sentimental approach would have broken the emotional language the franchise created. Snipes understands that Blade's silence is not emptiness, it is protection. Kristofferson strengthens that relationship by giving Whistler the exhausted toughness of someone who has survived far beyond the point most people would have surrendered. Whistler is not as physically powerful as Blade, but he remains useful because he understands enemies, traps, and betrayal. His experience becomes a different kind of weapon. The scene in which he survives Chupa's attack proves this perfectly. Whistler cannot defeat him through speed or strength. Instead, he studies the environment and turns the Reaper's hunger against the man attacking him. The moment reinforces why Blade still needs him. Whistler does not survive because the story protects him. He survives because he knows how dangerous creatures think. Luke Goss also deserves credit for making Nomak more than a disposable monster. Nomak could have been presented as a purely physical threat, but Goss gives him a wounded intensity. His posture suggests that every movement costs him something. His anger feels personal rather than random. Even before the full truth is revealed, you can sense that his attacks have direction. He is not simply spreading an infection. He is moving toward the source of his pain. That distinction gives the villain emotional weight. Nomak is frightening because he is powerful but memorable because he is the consequence of someone else's ambition. His body has become a weapon, yet his expression often carries the sadness of a person who understands that he was never meant to live freely. Leonor Varela gives Nyssa an equally important internal conflict. Nyssa begins as a disciplined daughter and soldier. She believes in the structure around her because she has been raised inside it. Varela avoids making her change feel sudden. Instead, uncertainty appears in small reactions. Nyssa watches Blade. She studies the Reapers. She notices the difference between what her father says and what the evidence reveals. Her strongest work comes when loyalty begins turning into recognition. The character realizes that obedience has not protected her people. It has protected the person responsible for their suffering. That emotional shift gives the final act meaning beyond the action. The story construction works because nearly every major conflict grows from the same central idea: control creates resistance. Damaskinos tries to control vampire revolution and creates Numa. He attempts to control Blade through an alliance and underestimates him. He controls Nyssa through loyalty and eventually loses her trust. The Bloodpack tries to control the hunt through training, but discovers that preparation for one enemy does not guarantee survival against another. These separate storylines reinforce one another. The film does not need to explain the theme directly, because the structure keeps demonstrating it. Every attempt to dominate life produces instability. The Alliance is also an effective narrative device because it places Blade inside a world he would normally attack from the outside. That creates opportunities for tension that a standard hunting story could not provide. Blade must observe the vampire hierarchy at close range. He sees how soldiers are used, how information is controlled, and how family language hides political power. The story therefore expands the mythology without burying the film in explanation. Direction and visuals are another major strength. Guillermo del Toro gives the movie a physical identity. The environments feel touched, damaged, and occupied. The laboratories contain grime. The tunnels appear wet and claustrophobic. The vampire headquarters has grandeur, but also the lifeless atmosphere of a sealed tomb. This visual approach serves the story because the world itself appears infected before the Reapers fully invaded. The Reaper design is the most obvious triumph. The divided jaw remains unforgettable because it transforms a familiar face into something biologically impossible. The effect is not frightening only because it looks disturbing. It expresses the creature's entire existence. A Reaper has lost the ability to communicate normally. Its face has become an instrument of hunger. That design takes the film's theme of uncontrolled appetite and makes it visible in one movement. The action direction is strongest when it preserves Blade's physical authority while allowing the Reapers to threaten it. Blade moves with discipline. The creatures move as though their bodies have abandoned normal limits. Every confrontation therefore becomes a clash between technique and mutation. The ultraviolet bomb sequence is especially effective because the film takes a weakness normally associated with sunlight and converts it into a weapon of mass destruction. The expanding light is visually beautiful and terrifying at the same time. It gives the characters a brief sense of victory while revealing how extreme the situation has become. Music and sound give the film another level of momentum. The soundtrack combines electronic energy, industrial weight, and aggressive rhythm. Blade's action scenes feel almost choreographed to the music, but the score never makes him seem playful. The rhythm reinforces his focus. When the Reapers appear, the sound design becomes more biological. Scraping, breathing, sudden impacts, and wet transformations create discomfort before the creatures are fully visible. The contrast matters. Blade is associated with controlled rhythm. The Reapers are associated with unstable noise. The one scene that brings nearly all of the film's strengths together is the House of Pain attack. It begins with confidence. The vampires believe they are inside their own territory. The music is loud, the crowd is dense, and the Bloodpack enters prepared for a hunt. Then the balance shifts. The Reapers attack from within the population, turning the club's numbers into a disadvantage. Lighting fragments the space. The editing accelerates. The team begins losing formation. Blade discovers that his usual weapons cannot end the threat quickly. The sequence works because it is not merely a fight, it is the moment the entire power structure changes. The vampires experience fear inside a place designed to make them feel untouchable. The Bloodpack discovers that its training is incomplete. Blade realizes the enemy is more adaptive than expected. At the same time, the scene remains visually energetic and easy to remember. That is Blade 2 at his best. It gives you movement, atmosphere, creature horror, character conflict, and thematic meaning inside the same sequence. The film does not always achieve perfect balance, but when its elements align, it becomes exactly what an ambitious genre sequel should be: larger without losing personality, darker without becoming empty, and stranger without losing the hero at its center. Blade 2 moves with such confidence that its weaknesses are easy to overlook during the first watch. The action is fast, the creature design is memorable, and Wesley Snipes carries the film with enormous presence. But once the excitement settles, several parts of the movie feel less developed than they should. The largest weakness is the Bloodpack. Their introduction promises a group of elite specialists, each trained specifically to hunt Blade. Visually, they make a strong first impression. Their costumes, weapons, attitudes, and physical differences suggest that every member will bring a unique ability to the mission. Most of them never receive enough time to become real characters. Snowman is memorable because of Donyan's movement and screen presence, but the screenplay gives him almost nothing to say or feel. Assad appears important when he first approaches Blade, then disappears into the mission without leaving much emotional impact. Priest, Chupa, Lyhammer, and Verlaine are defined mainly by appearance, aggression, or the circumstances of their deaths. The problem is not that every supporting fighter needs a long backstory. The problem is that the film repeatedly asks us to care when these characters fall without first giving us enough reason to become attached to them. Nighthammer and Varlane come closest to receiving an emotional connection. Their final scene contains genuine tragedy because one character must face the transformation of someone close to her. But the relationship is introduced so lightly that the moment cannot reach its full potential. A few earlier scenes showing the Bloodpack together would have made their collapse more painful. We needed to understand their history, their loyalties, and how they functioned before Blade entered the group. Without that foundation, the team sometimes feels less like a dangerous military unit and more like a collection of distinctive designs waiting to be removed from the story. Reinhardt receives more attention, but his hostility becomes repetitive. Ron Perlman gives the character personality, physical threat, and dark humor. Yet Reinhardt spends much of the film reacting to Blade with the same wounded pride. Their rivalry is entertaining, but it rarely evolves. The story could have made him more interesting by forcing him to respect Blade gradually, only for that respect to conflict with his loyalty to Damaskinos. Instead, he remains openly aggressive until the final confrontation. This makes his eventual defeat satisfying but predictable. Scud presents a similar problem. Norman Reedus gives him an energetic, informal presence that contrasts well with Blade and Whistler. The tension between the two technicians creates useful friction, and the character initially feels like a believable addition to Blade's operation. His betrayal, however, is more functional than emotionally convincing. The film reveals that Scud has been working for Damaskinos, but it does not explore his motivation deeply enough. We understand what he did, yet not fully why he committed himself to a system that would almost certainly discard him once he stopped being useful. Was he afraid of the vampires? Did they promise him protection? Was he seeking power, money, or recognition? The film leaves those questions largely unanswered. Blade's awareness of the betrayal makes him look intelligent, but it also reduces the dramatic impact. Because Blade already knows, Scud never truly places him at a disadvantage through personal trust. The twist becomes another opportunity for Blade to prove that he is always prepared. That is enjoyable but emotionally limited. Nyssa's relationship with Blade also deserved more room. The film creates a fascinating connection between them. Both live between duty and identity. Both are connected to vampire blood while resisting what others expect them to become. Nyssa begins to recognize Blade's integrity while losing faith in her father. Their growing respect adds emotional texture to the mission. But the story moves so quickly that their bond remains partly implied. Her final sunrise scene is beautiful, yet it asks the moment to carry more emotional weight than their relationship has fully earned. A few quieter conversations could have made that ending devastating rather than simply moving. The film's pacing is therefore both a strength and a weakness. It rarely becomes boring. Every section introduces a confrontation, discovery, weapon, betrayal, or new threat. But speed comes at a cost. The movie is so eager to reach the next visual idea that it occasionally rushes past the human consequences of what just happened. The Bloodpack loses members. Whistler returns after years of suffering. Nyssa discovers that her father created the crisis, and Nomak confronts the truth of his birth. Any one of these ideas could support deeper emotional exploration. The film usually acknowledges them, then moves forward. There are also moments when the digital effects weaken the physical impact of the action. Much of Blade 2 feels tangible because of the sets, prosthetics, costumes, and practical creature work. But during certain fights, computer generated bodies move with exaggerated speed and unnatural weight. The intention is clear. The film wants the action to feel like a moving comic book. Still, some transitions between real performers and digital doubles are noticeable enough to break immersion. Blade temporarily stops feeling like a powerful body inside a real environment and begins to look like an animated figure passing through it. These effects do not ruin the sequences. They simply age less gracefully than the practical work surrounding them. The Reapers also become slightly less frightening once their rules are fully explained. Early in the film, they are unpredictable. Their anatomy is unknown, their resistance seems limitless, and their feeding behavior creates panic. Once the characters discover their weaknesses and construct specialized ultraviolet weapons, the creatures begin shifting from horror figures into action targets. That progression is necessary for the story, but the final act loses some of the fear that made the House of Pain sequence so effective. Damaskinos is another missed opportunity. The character represents ancient power, scientific arrogance, and the desire to control evolution. His decisions create the entire crisis, yet he remains distant for most of the film. We understand his role intellectually, but the movie could have explored his relationship with Nomak and Nyssa more deeply. His refusal to see them as individuals is central to the tragedy, but he does not receive enough complexity to become a truly unforgettable villain. Nomak carries the emotional consequences of Damaskinos' choices more effectively than Damaskinos carries the responsibility. None of these flaws destroys Blade 2. The film's momentum, atmosphere, action, and central performance remain strong enough to hold the experience together. Its weaknesses are mostly missed opportunities rather than fundamental failures, but they do limit how deeply the story can affect you. Blade 2 gives its world extraordinary texture. It gives its monsters unforgettable bodies. It gives its hero complete control. What it does not always give its supporting characters is enough time to become more than powerful pieces moving through that world. To understand what makes Blade 2 distinctive, place it beside other films that combine monsters, action, and underground mythology. The first comparison has to be Blade from 1998. The original film is cleaner in its storytelling and more focused on Blade as a solitary hunter. Its vampire world feels connected to modern cities, corporate influence, nightclubs, and hidden social power. The villains believe they can control humanity because they already operate inside its institutions. Blade 2 moves in the opposite direction. It leaves much of that urban conspiracy behind and enters laboratories, tunnels, fortified compounds, and decaying European spaces. The first film is about exposing a secret society. The sequel is about watching that society panic when its own system produces something it cannot contain. The original may be stronger as a direct introduction to Blade. His history, abilities, mission, and relationship with Whistler have more room to breathe. Way 2 is stronger as a creature feature. It gives the world greater texture, makes the action more physical, and introduces a threat that changes the rules instead of simply increasing the power level. If you love Blade because of the character's calm presence and underground cool, the first movie remains essential. If you prefer horror, team conflict, and stranger monster design, Blade 2 may be the more exciting experience. The second useful comparison is Underworld, released 1 year later. Both films present hidden wars involving vampires, advanced weapons, leather costumes, ancient bloodlines, and industrial environments. They share a fascination with secret species operating beneath modern life, but their emotional rhythms are very different. Underworld builds its world through political mythology, forbidden loyalty, and a long running conflict between supernatural factions. It is colder, more romantic, and more interested in family histories. Blade 2 is more immediate. Its mythology exists to pressure the mission rather than slow it down. The film spends less time explaining ancient rules and more time throwing incompatible fighters into enclosed spaces. Where Underworld feels like a gothic war drama, Blade 2 feels like a biological emergency. Blade is also a very different central figure from Selene. Selene is part of the system before she begins questioning it. Blade has always existed outside the system. He does not need to discover that the vampire hierarchy is corrupt. He enters the story already expecting deception. That gives Blade 2 a sharper distrust from the beginning. Watch Underworld next if you enjoy the vampire politics, bloodline secrets, and dark visual world of Blade 2, but want something more focused on romance and mythology. Stay with Blade 2 when you want faster movement, stronger martial arts, and a hero who does not need permission to challenge the structure around him. The third comparison is Aliens. The genres are different on the surface, but the structure reveals a strong connection. Both films follow a group of heavily armed specialists entering hostile territory to eliminate a creature they do not fully understand. The team arrives with advanced equipment, confidence, and training. Then the enemy begins attacking from the environment itself, separating the group and proving that preparation was built around the wrong assumptions. The Bloodpack shares the same tragic confidence as the colonial marines. They look unstoppable before the mission starts. Their personalities are introduced quickly through behavior, weapons, and attitude. Once they enter the nest, their formation breaks down and their technology becomes less reliable. The difference is that Aliens develops its supporting team more effectively. Several Marines become memorable not only because of how they fight, but because of how they react to fear. Their panic, humor, loyalty, and sacrifice create emotional investment. Blade 2 gives its Bloodpack excellent designs but less personality. When members fall, the losses create tension without always creating grief. Where Blade 2 has the advantage is in the Central Alliance. Blade is not merely joining soldiers, he is leading enemies who are trained to kill him. That extra layer of hostility means the danger exists both inside and outside the team. If the sewer hunt is your favorite section of Blade 2, Aliens is the clearest recommendation. It offers the same pleasure of watching an elite force discover that firepower cannot replace understanding. The fourth comparison is Hellboy, another Guillermo del Toro comic book adaptation released 2 years later. Both films are filled with creatures, underground architecture, unusual technology, ancient power, and heroes whose bodies place them between human society and the monsters they fight. But Hellboy is warmer. Its characters form a damaged family. Humor, affection, and loneliness are allowed to remain close to the surface. Hellboy wants connection even when he pretends not to care. Blade protects connection by hiding it. He rarely asks to belong anywhere. His emotional life appears through the people he refuses to abandon, particularly Whistler. This makes Blade 2 harder and more severe, while Hellboy feels more openly compassionate. Del Toro's creature imagination is visible in both films, but it serves different purposes. In Hellboy, monsters often feel strange, tragic, or beautiful. In Blade 2, the Reapers are designed to represent uncontrolled appetite and biological failure. Watch Hellboy if you enjoy Blade 2's production design and monster mythology, but want more humor, heart, and character intimacy. So, what does Blade 2 do that these films do not? It combines the solitary cool of a vampire hunter, the pressure of a military survival story, the paranoia of an enemy alliance, and the physical disgust of mutation horror. Very few films balance those elements with the same aggression. It falls short beside Aliens in supporting character development. It offers less detailed mythology than Underworld. It has less emotional warmth than Hellboy, and the original Blade remains a better introduction to the hero. But Blade 2 is stranger than all of them in one very specific way. It forces monsters to hire the man who hunts them because they have accidentally created something even they cannot face. That idea gives the film its identity. If you loved Blade 2, watch Blade D, Aliens, Underworld, and Hellboy next. Each one opens a different side of the same box: the hunter, the mission, the hidden society, and the misunderstood monster. If you dislike Blade 2 because the effects felt exaggerated or the characters lack depth, Aliens offers a stronger emotional team dynamic, while Hellboy provides a more human connection to its supernatural world. Blade 2 may not defeat every film beside it, but none of those comparisons makes it disappear. The movie remains its own creature, fast, infected, visually fearless, and completely comfortable inside the darkness it creates. Blade 2 arrived in 2002, during a strange transitional moment for comic book cinema. The modern superhero blockbuster had not yet become the dominant language of Hollywood. X-Men had shown that comic book characters could be treated seriously. Spider-Man was about to demonstrate how enormous the audience for them could become. But there was no established cinematic universe, no expectation that every film needed to prepare 5 sequels, and no single formula controlling how a comic book adaptation should look. That freedom matters. Blade 2 was allowed to behave like an action film, a horror movie, a martial arts spectacle, and a creature feature at the same time. It did not need to soften its identity to resemble other franchise plan. It could remain violent, gothic, industrial, and aimed at an older audience. In retrospect, that makes a film feel unusually independent. It belongs to Marvel history, but it does not feel like a product created to advertise the next chapter of a carefully coordinated universe. The movie is focused on its own atmosphere, its own monsters, and its own immediate conflict. That self contained confidence is one reason it has aged so interestingly. The cultural position of vampires was also changing. During the late 1990s and early 2000s, screen vampires appeared in many forms. Some were romantic outsiders, some were romantic outsiders. Others were secret predators hiding inside modern society. The Blade films rejected much of the tragic romance normally associated with them. Their vampires created corporations, built political hierarchies, controlled exclusive spaces, and treated humans as resources. They were not simply cursed individuals struggling with immortality. They were an organized ruling class. Blade 2 takes that concept and destabilizes it. The vampires have spent centuries presenting themselves as superior beings, yet their own experiments produce a species capable of replacing them. Their power suddenly looks temporary. That idea connected naturally to the anxieties surrounding technology and biological control at the beginning of the new century. Scientific progress was accelerating. Public conversations about genetics, cloning, disease, and engineered life were becoming more visible. Blade 2 turns those concerns into monster mythology. Damaskinos does not accept the limitations of his species. He wants to redesign it. The Reapers are the consequence. The film's horror, therefore, comes from more than supernatural evil. It comes from the belief that intelligence automatically gives someone the right to manipulate life. Damaskinos sees evolution as a process he can own, direct, and improve. What he creates refuses to remain under his control. That theme gives the movie a cultural relevance beyond its leather costumes and electronic soundtrack. The story reflects a fear that still feels familiar: powerful institutions creating dangerous systems, hiding their responsibility, and asking everyone else to manage the consequences. Blade is invited to solve a crisis without being given the truth. The Bloodpack is sent into danger without understanding what created the enemy. Nyssa is expected to remain loyal because challenging her father would threaten the structure around her. The system protects authority before it protects life. Critics at the time responded unevenly to the film. Many recognized its visual energy, Wesley Snipes' commanding performance, Guillermo del Toro's creature design, and the improvement in action and horror. Others criticized the thin supporting characters, aggressive style, and story built more around momentum than emotional depth. That division makes sense. Blade 2 is not attempting to wit his fall in a conventional way. It is loud, exaggerated, physically strange, and deeply committed to genre. The same qualities that make it exciting can make it feel excessive. Those looking for rich dramatic development may see underwritten characters and non-stop confrontation. Those willing to accept its comic book intensity may see a filmmaker turning a studio sequel into a personal monster movie. Audiences were often more receptive to that energy. The film delivered the version of Blade many people wanted: controlled, powerful, stylish, and placed against an enemy capable of challenging him physically. It expanded the world without removing the qualities that made the character popular. Its commercial success also demonstrated that a darker comic book film led by a black hero could reach a substantial international audience. That importance should not be overlooked. Wesley Snipes was carrying a major Marvel adaptation years before interconnected superhero franchises became routine. Blade was not presented as a supporting figure or an experiment hidden inside someone else's movie. He was the center. His appearance, movement, weapons, attitude, and identity defined the franchise. Blade 2 reinforced that cultural presence by making him the one figure both humans and vampires needed when their systems failed. The film was never positioned as a traditional awards season production, and its greatest achievements existed in areas mainstream awards often ignored. The creature effects deserved greater recognition. The combination of prosthetic design and digital movement created an enemy that still remains visually identifiable decades later. The production design also deserves more attention. Its laboratories, tunnels, clubs, and vampire chambers create a complete world without requiring constant explanation. And Wesley Snipes' physical performance is easy to underestimate because he makes the character's control look effortless. His work depends on timing, posture, stillness, choreography, and an understanding of how little Blade needs to say. That kind of performance rarely receives the same recognition as emotionally expressive drama, even though it is essential to the film's success. The movie's reputation has strengthened through home video, television broadcasts, online discussion, and later digital discovery. As comic book cinema became cleaner, larger, and more interconnected, Blade 2 began to feel increasingly unusual. Its roughness became part of its appeal. The practical environments feel more valuable now because so many modern productions rely heavily on digitally constructed spaces. The creature effects have imperfections, but they possess texture. The action can look exaggerated, yet it often feels choreographed around actual bodies. Even its early 2000s music and fashion have gained nostalgic power. The long coats, metallic weapons, electronic beats, colored lighting, and underground club aesthetic capture a very specific period. The film does not hide when it was made. That keeps it from feeling timeless in the traditional sense. But being perfectly of its era is not the same as becoming irrelevant. Blade 2 survives because its strongest ideas remain effective. Fear can reverse power. Institutions can create the threats they claim to fight. Loyalty becomes dangerous when it requires ignoring the truth. Identity does not have to be controlled by blood. The visual language belongs unmistakably to 2002. The warning underneath it still feels current. That combination explains why the film has developed such a durable second life. It is remembered not simply as another sequel, but as the moment Guillermo del Toro was allowed to infect a superhero franchise with his own imagination. And once a film creates that many unanswered questions, fan theories inevitably begin filling the darkness between what we are shown and what we are only invited to suspect. Blade 2 explains its central conspiracy, but it leaves enough space around its characters for several interpretations to survive. The most convincing theory is that Nomak was deliberately written as Blade's distorted reflection rather than a conventional final villain. Both are hybrids created by vampire interference. Both can survive conditions that destroy ordinary vampires. Both are rejected by the societies connected to their blood, and both turn their isolation into a weapon. The difference is what they do with that pain. Blade builds discipline around his hunger. He chooses a purpose, maintains human relationships, and refuses to let his biology decide his morality. Nomak allows rejection to become his entire identity. His suffering gives him a target, but nothing beyond that target. This reading has remained common in fan discussions, where Nomak is frequently described as a tragic antagonist who mirrors Blade more closely than the film initially admits. The theory holds up because their final battle is not a simple conflict between good and evil. Blade and Nomak have already helped destroy different parts of the same corrupt system. Blade exposes Damaskinos' betrayal and eliminates his forces. Nomak reaches the ruler himself and delivers the consequence of his experiments. By the time the two hybrids face each other, their real enemy is already gone. That has led some fans to argue that Blade and Nomak could have walked away or even formed a temporary partnership. They are both products of vampire attempts to manipulate life, and both have reasons to destroy the hierarchy that created them. But look closer and that alliance falls apart. Blade fights to prevent suffering from spreading. Nomak spreads his condition deliberately. Blade protects human life even when humanity does not fully accept him. Nomak treats other lives as fuel for revenge. Their origins may be similar, but their choices are not. Blade sees identity as something he can control. Nomak sees identity as a wound everyone else should be forced to share. The film therefore supports the mirror theory, while denying the idea that resemblance automatically creates brotherhood. Another interpretation suggests that Damaskinos never intended simply to eliminate the Reapers. He wanted to study Blade and use the crisis to complete the experiment that failed with Nomak. This theory fits the ruler's behavior. He possesses access to advanced research, an elite strike team, and detailed knowledge of vampire biology. Yet he brings Blade directly into his compound, allows Nyssa to examine a captured Reaper beside him, and eventually orders Blade's blood harvested. That makes the alliance look less like desperation and more like a controlled trial. Blade is the successful hybrid Damaskinos could not manufacture. He possesses vampire strength without their fatal response to sunlight. He controls his hunger. He maintains intelligence, restraint, and physical stability. Nomak represents the failed artificial version of what Blade became naturally. Under this reading, the mission allows Damaskinos to observe both outcomes at once. He sends Blade to test himself against Nomak's species, waits for the strongest survivors to emerge, and then collects the biological material he needs. The theory is never confirmed, but the film strongly supports the idea that Damaskinos sees Blade less as an ally than as missing research. Athar debates around Scud and the exact moment Blade discovered this betrayal. The film tells us Blade already knew Scud was working for the vampires, but it never explains precisely how long he had known. This has produced a persistent logic question among fans. If Blade identified the traitor early, why allow Scud continued access to his base, weapons, and mission planning? One explanation is that Blade kept Scud close to control the information reaching Damaskinos. A known spy can be more useful than an unknown replacement. By pretending to trust Scud, Blade could allow the vampires to believe their plan remained hidden. Removing him too early might have warned Damaskinos, caused the alliance to collapse, or encouraged the vampires to introduce another operative Blade had not identified. This interpretation also gives greater meaning to Blade's repeated emotional distance. He does not merely avoid trusting Scud because he prefers Whistler. He may be performing a relationship while waiting for the betrayal to become useful. The theory is believable, although the screenplay does not provide enough evidence to make it certain. It is equally possible that Blade discovered the truth later, tested the explosive independently, and exaggerated how long he had known to maintain psychological control in the final confrontation. That possibility makes Blade slightly less superhuman and slightly more interesting. Another theory focuses on why Nomak kills Damaskinos instead of infecting him. Nomak spreads the Reaper strain through many of his attacks, yet he appears to deny his father that transformation. Fan discussions often interpret this as a deliberate choice. Nomad does not want Damaskinos to become part of the new species or possess the strength created through his own experiments. He wants his father's life to end without granting him another evolutionary advantage. This reading gives the act emotional precision. Infecting Damaskinos would allow the ruler to claim even Nomad's revenge as another successful experiment. Killing him completely removes that possibility. Nomak may consider the Reaper condition a curse, but it is the only identity his father left him. Refusing to pass it back becomes his final act of ownership. The most unsettling theory concerns Nyssa. Some interpretations suggest Nomak infects her not merely to hurt Damaskinos, but because he sees her as the favored child, the version of family acceptance he was denied. Nyssa received status, protection, and a place beside their father. Nomak received experimentation, rejection, and a body he could no longer control. By turning her, he forces Nyssa to experience the fate Damaskinos assigned to him. The theory fits Nomak's anger, but it does not excuse the cruelty. Nyssa is also a victim of her father's control. She discovers the truth and rejects him. Yet Nomak punishes her for a life she did not design. That is what makes him tragic rather than secretly heroic. He correctly identifies the source of his suffering but allows revenge to strike someone who is beginning to resist that source herself. Each of these theories leads back to the same idea. Blade 2 is not truly debating which bloodline is strongest. It is asking whether suffering must be inherited. Blade interrupts that inheritance, Nomak continues it. And beneath the mutations, betrayals, and hidden experiments lies the deeper layer of a film about appetite, identity, and the dangerous human desire to control what would never belong to us. Beneath the weapons, mutations, and vampire mythology, Blade 2 is really about the struggle to control hunger. Every major character wants something that threatens to consume them. For Blade, that hunger is literal. Vampire blood runs through him, giving him strength while constantly reminding him that he could become the kind of creature he hunts. His discipline is not simply an impressive personality trait, it is the structure holding his identity together. Blade wakes up every day and chooses control. That choice makes him more human than many of the humans and vampires around him. Humanity in this film is not determined by biology, it is determined by responsibility. Blade experiences hunger, anger, grief, and isolation, but he refuses to treat those feelings as permission to harm others. His strength comes from admitting the darkness exists without allowing it to become his entire identity. Nomak represents the opposite path. He is also divided between forms, but he has no stable identity to return to. He was created through experimentation, rejected by his father, and treated as a failed design rather than a living being. His hunger becomes inseparable from his pain. Nomak does not simply feed because his body requires it. He spreads his condition because suffering is the only connection he understands. If everyone carries the same wound, then he will no longer be alone inside it. That is one of the film's darkest ideas. People who are hurt do not always seek healing. Sometimes they seek witnesses. Sometimes they want others to feel what they felt, believing shared pain will somehow make the original wound meaningful. But pain multiplied is not pain resolved. Nomak's tragedy is that he sees the truth about Damaskinos but chooses the wrong response. He understands that his father treated life as property. He understands that the vampire leadership protects itself through secrecy and sacrifice. Yet instead of ending that pattern, Nomak repeats it. Damaskinos transformed him without consent. Nomak transforms others without consent. His rebellion begins as resistance and becomes another form of domination. Blade breaks that cycle because he understands that being victimized does not remove responsibility for what you do next. Here is what most people miss. The central difference between Blade and Nomak is not strength, it is the existence of human connection. Blade has Whistler. Their relationship is imperfect, harsh, and rarely sentimental, but it gives Blade something outside himself to protect. Whistler does not cure Blade's isolation. He proves that isolation does not have to become total. Blade also protects people he may never meet. Every vampire he eliminates and every outbreak he stops prevents someone else from becoming a victim. His work gives direction to the conflict inside him. Nomak has no equivalent bond. His father sees him as an experiment. His sister barely knows the truth of his existence. His followers are created through infection rather than trust. He builds an army but not a community. That distinction matters because control based on fear can create obedience, but it cannot create belonging. The film also explores the danger of parents who treat children as extensions of their ambition. Damaskinos does not love Nomak or Nyssa as separate individuals. He values them according to how well they serve his vision. Nomak represents failure, so he is hidden. Nyssa represents loyalty, so she is kept close. Neither child is truly seen. This makes the family conflict larger than vampire politics. It reflects something painfully human, the damage caused when a parent values achievement, obedience, or legacy more than the person standing in front of them. Nomak spends the story trying to force his father to acknowledge what he created. Nyssa spends the story discovering that her father's approval was built on deception. Both children are trapped inside roles Damaskinos chose for them. Nomak is a rejected mistake. Nyssa is the obedient heir. Freedom begins only when those roles collapse. Nyssa's journey is quieter than Blade's or Nomak's, but it carries the film's moral awakening. She begins by believing authority and truth are the same thing. Her father leads their people, so she assumes his decisions exist for their survival. Evidence slowly separates those ideas. She sees the Reaper suffering. She recognizes Blade's integrity. She discovers that the official story was designed to protect Damaskinos rather than the vampire population. Her loyalty changes because she learns that love without truth becomes submission. That is a difficult realization. Rejecting Damaskinos means rejecting the structure that gave her identity, status, and purpose. Yet remaining loyal would require her to deny what she knows. Nyssa chooses truth, even when the choice arrives too late to save her. The recurring imagery of blood connects all of these ideas. Blood is inheritance. It determines species, power, hunger, and vulnerability. Damaskinos believes blood can be perfected. The vampires believe blood establishes hierarchy. The reapers consume it compulsively. Blade depends on a serum to control what his blood demands. But the film repeatedly shows that blood cannot define moral identity. Blade shares vampire biology without accepting vampire cruelty. Nyssa comes from Damaskinos' bloodline, but rejects his values. Nomak shares the same family blood and becomes the force that destroys it. What runs through the body may shape a person. It does not finish the decision of who they become. The film's use of mouths and feeding reinforces this theme. The Reaper's divided jaw is hunger made visible. Its face can no longer hide the appetite beneath it. The ordinary vampire still appears controlled, elegant, and socially organized, while the Reaper reveals the same desire in its most extreme form. The Reapers are therefore not completely separate from the vampires. They are the vampire system stripped of manners. Both survive by taking life from others. The Reaper simply removes the illusion of sophistication. That is why the vampire leadership fears them so deeply. The Reapers do not only threaten their survival, they expose what their society has always been built upon. Blade threatens that illusion in a different way. He possesses the strength the vampires admire but uses it to defend those they consider weak. His existence proves that power does not require cruelty. This is why Damaskinos wants Blade's blood. Blade is evidence that the ruler's entire philosophy is wrong. He believes perfection must be manufactured through control, but Blade's strength comes from restraint, loyalty, and chosen purpose. The final sunrise gives these ideas their emotional conclusion. Nyssa asks to face daylight rather than continue as something created through her father and brother's violence. Blade carries her outside and remains beside her. For a moment, the film stops being about hunters and monsters. It becomes about allowing someone to choose how their story ends. Blade cannot save Nyssa's body, but he can refuse to let her final moment be controlled by the men who tried to define her. That act reveals the humanity behind his silence. Blade 3 ultimately argues that darkness is not defeated by pretending it does not exist. Blade carries darkness inside him. What saves him is the decision to give it boundaries. Damaskinos tries to master hunger through science. Nomak surrenders to hunger through revenge. The vampires hide hunger beneath hierarchy. Blade lives with it, controls it, and turns its power toward protecting others. That is the deeper layer inside the box. We do not choose every wound, instinct, family, or burden handed to us. But the film insists that we are still responsible for what we build from them. Blade 2 did not reinvent superhero cinema by itself, but it proved that a comic book sequel could become darker, stranger, and more personal without abandoning the hero who made the franchise work. Its most important legacy is the way it fused genres. This is not simply a vampire film with action scenes or a superhero movie wearing horror imagery. Martial arts, creature horror, science fiction, gothic design, electronic music, and comic book exaggeration all operate together. That mixture helped demonstrate that comic book adaptations did not need to follow one visual or emotional formula. Blade could exist in a narrated world of underground clubs, experiments, mutations, and physical danger. The film trusted an older audience to accept a superhero story that was aggressive, unsettling, and morally complicated. Years later, darker comic book films would be treated as a valuable alternative to brighter mainstream franchises. Blade 2 was already showing how effective that approach could be when the darkness grew naturally from the character and his world. The film also strengthened Guillermo del Toro's reputation as a director who could enter an existing franchise and still leave a recognizable creative signature. The divided Reaper jaw, biological transformations, damp environments, ancient architecture, damaged bodies, and tragic monster all carry ideas that continued appearing throughout his later work. Del Toro frequently treats monsters as more than obstacles. They may be frightening, but they are also products of loneliness, cruelty, experimentation, or rejection. Nomak follows that pattern. He is dangerous enough to serve as the film's central threat, yet tragic enough to make his death feel like the end of suffering rather than the defeat of pure evil. That emotional treatment of the creature separates Blade 2 from many action sequels of its period. The movie's influence can also be felt in later stories built around unstable alliances between supernatural enemies. It structured rival factions joining forces against a mutation threatening them. Both became familiar across horror, fantasy, television, and franchise cinema. Blade 2 did not invent that idea, but it delivered a particularly memorable version because the alliance never becomes comfortable. Blade and the vampires do not learn to love one another. They cooperate because survival temporarily matters more than hatred. That refusal to create an easy friendship gives the story lasting tension. The action also contributed to Blade's importance within superhero history. Wesley Snipes made the character physical in a way that extended beyond ordinary fight choreography. Blade's posture, timing, weapon handling, silence, and controlled movement became inseparable from the role. Later superhero films would increasingly rely on actors performing highly designed combat styles that express personality. Blade T already understood that a hero's movement could function like dialogue. Blade fights the way he lives. He wastes little energy, reveals little emotion, and remains focused while everyone else loses control. The film's reputation has grown partly because the superhero landscape changed around it. When it was released, its visual effects, editing, and aggressive early 2000s aesthetic could seem excessive. Now, those same qualities give it personality. The movie does not resemble something created through a standardized franchise process. It looks handmade, imperfect, and specific. The practical sets and prosthetics give the world texture. The digital effects occasionally show their age, but even those imperfect moments reflect a willingness to experiment with movement and comic book physics. Modern audiences often return to Blade 2 not because every element remains flawless, but because the film feels committed. It knows what it wants to be. Its underground club imagery, industrial music, long coats, metallic weapons, and colored lighting preserve the visual identity of its era. Rather than weakening the experience, that identity has become part of its appeal. The film is now frequently remembered as one of the rare sequels that expanded a franchise by changing its genre emphasis. The first Blade leaned heavily into urban action and vampire conspiracy. Blade 2 moved farther toward creature horror and military survival. It did not replace the original, it opened another side of the character's world. Its influence on the Blade franchise is also complicated by what followed. The third film failed to maintain the same balance of horror, action, atmosphere, and controlled character work. That disappointment made Blade 2 appear even stronger in retrospect. It became the chapter where all the necessary elements aligned. Wesley Snipes' authority, Whistler's return, Del Toro's creature imagination, strong combat design, and an enemy that challenged Blade thematically as well as physically. The film's most lasting contribution may be the simple fact that it allowed Blade to remain entirely himself. He was not softened to reach a broader audience. He was not pushed aside by the mythology around him. He did not become more talkative, more cheerful, or easier for the vampire world to accept. The sequel expands everything around Blade while preserving the discipline at his center. That is why Blade 2 continues to matter. It represents a period when superhero cinema was still unpredictable enough for a filmmaker to take a Marvel character, place him inside an infected gothic nightmare, and build an entire blockbuster around distrust, mutation, and hunger. Its reputation has grown because the film still possesses something increasingly difficult to manufacture: a clear identity. And before we close the box, we need to return to every major betrayal, hidden clue, and final choice with no protection from spoilers. Alright, full spoilers from this point. If you haven't seen the film yet, close this now. Go watch it and come back when you're ready. Trust me, you'll want to experience it fresh. The first major revelation is that Whistler did not truly die at the end of the previous film. The vampires found him, transformed him, and kept him alive as a form of punishment. Blade spends 2 years following rumors until he finally discovers the facility where Whistler is being held. That rescue establishes Blade's emotional motivation before the central rebirth plot begins. He may appear detached, but he never accepted Whistler's disappearance. His search proves that loyalty remains one of the few forces capable of breaking through his controlled exterior. Blade brings Whistler home and gives him the serum that may reverse his transformation. The moment also introduces a recurring question: can someone return from contamination without losing who they were? Whistler survives, but Blade still watches him carefully. That suspicion is not cruelty. It is the same caution that later allows Blade to recognize betrayal before it becomes fatal. The next turning point arrives when Nyssa and Assad enter Blade's headquarters on behalf of Eli Damaskinos. The vampire ruler claims that a new species called the Reapers is spreading through the population. Their bite transforms vampires and humans alike, and their constant hunger could eventually destroy both societies. Blade agrees to help because he understands the consequences for humanity, but the alliance is already built on incomplete information. Damaskinos tells Blade what the Reapers are doing. He does not tell him why they exist. The Bloodpack is then introduced as Blade's support team, even though its members were originally trained to assassinate him. Reinhardt's early challenge allows Blade to establish authority, but it also foreshadows the larger relationship. The vampires believe they can use Blade without respecting him. Blade cooperates while refusing to surrender control. At the House of Pain, the team encounters the Reapers directly. Their divided jaws, resistance to conventional attacks, and rapid infection reveal that every familiar vampire hunting rule has become unreliable. Kris is bitten, and his transformation demonstrates how quickly the condition takes over. When Blade destroys him with ultraviolet light, the team learns that sunlight remains one of the Reaper's few weaknesses. This discovery leads to the development of ultraviolet weapons and the large bomb later used inside the sewer nest. But the captured Reaper reveals something even more important. Its body is extremely powerful, yet its accelerated metabolism forces it to feed constantly. Strength and weakness exist together. The creature's appetite makes it dangerous, but that appetite also controls its behavior. Nomak is different. He retains intelligence, purpose, and enough emotional memory to direct the Reaper outbreak toward the vampire leadership. His attacks are not random. He is returning to the place where his suffering began. The sewer mission exposes the Bloodpack's greatest weakness. They were trained to fight Blade, a disciplined opponent who plans his attacks and understands tactics. The Reapers behave like an infection moving through the environment. They separate the group, attack from hidden positions, and turn every wounded fighter into a possible threat. Lighthammer conceals his bite until the transformation begins. Verlaine is forced to confront someone she cares about after his identity has already started disappearing. Their deaths reinforce the film's central warning. Hiding contamination does not prevent consequences. It only delays them until fewer choices remain. Chupa's attack on Whistler reveals another form of betrayal. Instead of focusing on the mission, he uses the chaos to settle personal anger. Whistler survives by releasing the scent that attracts Reapers, turning their hunger against Chupa. The scene proves that experience can be more valuable than physical strength. Blade detonates the ultraviolet bomb, destroying most of the creatures. Nomak survives because his body is stronger and more advanced than those of the Reapers he created. That survival is the first major clue that he is not simply another infected vampire. The full truth appears after Damaskinos betrays Blade and takes control of the survivors. Nomak is Damaskinos' son. He was created through an attempt to engineer a superior vampire, one without the weaknesses that limited the species. Instead, the experiment produced the Reaper strain. This means the entire mission was based on a lie. Damaskinos did not ask Blade to protect the vampire population from an external threat. He asked Blade to clean up the consequences of his own ambition. The ruler then harvests Blade's blood because Blade possesses everything his experiments failed to create: vampire strength, human stability, controlled hunger, and resistance to sunlight. Blade was never simply an ally. He was the final piece of research. Nyssa's reaction is crucial because her loyalty has been built around the belief that her father protects their people. Once she discovers that he created Nomak, hid the truth, and sacrificed the Bloodpack, that belief collapses. Damaskinos does not see Nyssa and Nomak as children with independent lives. He sees them as outcomes. Nyssa is the obedient success. Nomak is the rejected failure. Then Scud reveals that he has been working for Damaskinos. The betrayal explains how the vampire leadership remained informed about Blade's technology and movements. Scud claims that the explosive blade attached to Reinhardt was never functional. Blade activates it anyway. The moment reveals that Blade had already recognized Scud's deception and never trusted him with complete control of the weapon. This is also why Blade survived the conspiracy. He does not confuse cooperation with trust. He allows other people to believe they understand his plan while keeping the final decision in his own hands. After Whistler frees him from the blood harvesting chamber, Blade restores his strength by entering the blood pool. The symbolism is powerful. Damaskinos believes blood determines ownership, hierarchy, and perfection. Blade uses that same blood to reclaim his independence and destroy the system attempting to control him. His attack on the guards is the release of everything he has restrained throughout the mission. He defeats Reinhardt, dismantles the remaining forces, and proves that the vampires never understood the weapon they invited into their home. At the same time, Nomak reaches Damaskinos. The father attempts to distance himself from the suffering he created, but Nomak forces him to confront it directly. Nomak kills him rather than granting him another chance to exploit the Reaper condition, yet revenge does not satisfy Nomak. He attacks Nyssa and infects her, punishing the favored child for the acceptance he was denied. This is where his tragedy becomes cruelty. Nyssa was also manipulated by Damaskinos. She had begun rejecting her father's authority. Nomak cannot see that because revenge has reduced everyone to a symbol of his pain. Blade and Nomak then meet in the final battle. Their physical similarities are clear. Both are hybrids. Both are stronger than ordinary vampires. Both were shaped by circumstances they did not choose. The difference is moral. Blade refuses to spread his suffering. Nomak wants the world to carry his wound. Blade discovers that Nomak's protective bone structure contains a small opening near the heart. He drives his weapon through that weakness, and Nomak pushes himself deeper onto it, accepting death almost willingly. His final reaction suggests relief. He has killed his creator, destroyed the family structure that rejected him, and reached the end of a life defined entirely by hunger and revenge. The ending then becomes quiet. Nyssa knows the infection will transform her. Rather than continue as another Reaper, she asks Blade to take her outside. He carries her into the approaching sunrise. Blade cannot reverse what happened, but he gives Nyssa something her father denied both of his children: control over her own fate. As the sunlight reaches her, Blade remains beside her. It is one of the rare moments when his compassion appears without armor. There is no strategic value in staying. He stays because she should not face the end alone. The final scene returns to Rush, the vampire Blade allowed to escape during Whistler's rescue. Rush believes he has found safety in an adult booth in London, only for Blade to appear behind him. The scene functions as a dark joke, but it also restores the larger mission. The Reaper crisis is over. Damaskinos is dead. Nyssa and Nomak are gone. Blade's war continues. There is no traditional post-credit scene introducing another villain. The final Rush encounter serves as the closing reminder that Blade never forgets unfinished business. The hidden structure of the film becomes clear only at the end. Every major threat comes from Damaskinos trying to control life. Nomak is his failed experiment. Nyssa is his controlled heir. The Bloodpack is his disposable weapon. Scud is his infiltrator. Blade is the biological resource he intends to exploit. The ruler believes everything around him exists to serve his vision. His destruction begins when those living tools recognize that they can choose for themselves. Nyssa rejects him. Blade escapes him. Nomak returns to him. And the empire that appeared ancient and untouchable collapses in a single night. My reaction to the ending is that Blade 2 succeeds because it gives victory a cost. Blade stops the outbreak, but he cannot save Nyssa. Nomak finds his father, but revenge leaves him with nothing. The vampire system survives in some form, but its illusion of superiority has been permanently broken. The ending does not promise peace. It proves that control without compassion eventually creates a force that destroys it. Blade 2 earns a personal rating of 6.5 out of 10. That score may sound restrained for a film with this much style, energy, and personality, but it reflects both sides of the experience. When Blade 2 is working, it is one of the most distinctive comic book action films of its era. Wesley Snipes completely owns the role. Guillermo del Toro fills the world with memorable creatures, industrial darkness, and physical texture. The action moves with confidence. The Reaper genuinely changed the balance of power, and Noma gives the story a tragic enemy who reflects Blade in ways that become more meaningful with every rewatch. The movie also understands something many sequels forget. Going bigger is not enough. A continuation needs to change the pressure placed on its hero. Blade has already proved that he can hunt vampires. Blade 2 asks whether he can survive beside them, recognize their manipulation, and stop a threat created by their own ambition. That is a much stronger idea than simply giving him another powerful vampire to fight. The film loses points because too many supporting characters remain underdeveloped. The Bloodpack looks incredible, but several members disappear before they become emotionally important. Scud's betrayal needs stronger motivation. Nyssa and Blade's connection deserves more time. Damaskinos creates the entire tragedy, yet Nomak carries almost all of its emotional weight. Some digital effects also weaken the physical intensity of otherwise impressive fights. Whenever the film relies on real performers, prosthetics, sets, and carefully choreographed movement, it feels immediate. When bodies suddenly become weightless digital figures, part of that impact disappears. Still, those weaknesses do not erase what the film accomplishes. Blade 2 is for you if you enjoy dark action, vampire mythology, martial arts, creature design, and comic book films with a strong directorial identity. It is especially worth watching if you prefer practical environments and heroes who communicate through action rather than constant explanation. You may not connect with it if you need deep supporting character development, realistic physical movement, or a story that slows down to explore every emotional consequence. This is not a film I would describe as essential cinema for everyone, but for fans of action horror, supernatural thrillers, and early comic book adaptations, it is absolutely worth experiencing. Streaming is the ideal way to watch it for most people, especially late at night with the lights low and the sound turned up. But if you love physical media, creature effects features, or Guillermo del Toro's work, Blade 2 is also worth owning. Its production design and behind the scenes craftsmanship reward repeat viewing. The first Blade may be the more important film, Blade 2 may be the stranger one. And sometimes the stranger sequel is the one that stays alive longer. The film opens with Blade searching for someone he refused to abandon. It closes after he gives another person the freedom to choose her final moment. Between those scenes, he walks through betrayal, mutation, grief, and an alliance built on lies without allowing any of them to determine who he becomes. The Reapers are destroyed. The vampire empire is exposed. Numa's revenge reaches its end, and Blade returns to the darkness carrying the same hunger but making the same choice he has always made. The monster inside him does not get to control the man. Every film is a box, and we open this one together. Thank you for staying with me as we open Blade 2 layer by layer and look beyond the swords, ultraviolet weapons, and divided jaws. This film still creates discussion because it is more than a stylish sequel. It is a collision between superhero action and biological horror, built around a hero who remains powerful not because he fears no darkness, but because he refuses to surrender to it. Now I want to hear your verdict. Was Nomak truly the villain of this story, or was he another victim whose suffering transformed him into something he could no longer control? Leave your answer in the comments, along with your personal rating for Blade 2. I want to know whether you consider it the strongest chapter of the trilogy, or whether the original Blade still owns the top position, and tell me which film we should open next. Your suggestion may become the next full breakdown here on the Film Box. If you enjoyed this journey, support the channel by liking the video and subscribing. It helps us continue exploring the hidden details, difficult themes, filmmaking choices, and unforgettable moments inside the movies we love. Until then, stay curious, look beyond the surface, and never assume the first answer is the complete one. Every film is a box, and we only just started opening them. That's the Film Box. See you in the next one.